Are you able to grant me the privileges to share my screen, kindly?
Okay, just a sec.
Yeah, the list.
I think it's okay now. Let me see. Safari. Let's see.
Dan, you can now share, Bernard, you can now share your screen.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Sorry for that mix-up. As introduced earlier, my name is Bernard. I work here at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, specifically on issues of technology and issues of technology, basically. And today's session, or the topic today, is on internet and human rights. And just to give you a brief background about the information about the organization or what KHLC is, I'm sure some of you are aware, but allow me to just repeat. So Kenya Human Rights Commission is a non-governmental organization that was formed in 1994. It was registered in Kenya in 1994, but it was formed in 1991 as an NGO. At the time of its formation, most of its founders were based in the US. Most of the founders were exiled in the US. So it was later registered in Kenya in 1994. That is during the time when, if you remember for our history, around the time when we were around the time when there was the issues of multi-party, a single party state. That is around 1991 there. So during its formation, KHLC works, and just to put the distinction, there's usually a slight confusion when people talk about Kenya Human Rights Commission and others, and then there's also another organization named Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. So just to put the difference is that Kenya National Commission on Human Rights is indeed a government body, an independent government body that it's an independent government body. So just to put that distinction, one is the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, and this is Kenya Human Rights Commission. So I think we can proceed. Let me go on. So just to, so I think we start with the basic question on what are human rights. I'm sure most of you know what human rights are. So I think we can begin from there, from the simple definition or from the basic definition of human rights. How would you define human rights? Anybody can just unmute themselves and say what they think. What do you think human rights are? If you're asked what are human rights, what would you say they are? I mean, kila mtu tunasemanga siku hizi ni haki yetu, but what really, how would you define it if you were to be asked to do so?
In my opinion, these are the fundamental rights and freedoms that are intrinsic to the human person and need to be respected in order for them to live a dignified life.
Yes, I like that definition, fundamental human rights and freedoms that need to be respected in order for somebody to live a dignified life. Yes, it's basically what he said. You know, that human rights are basically human rights are rights that we have simply because we exist as human beings, and they're not granted by any state, obviously. And they range in when we talk about, I'm going to talk about the next section I'm going to talk about is the universality of human rights and inalienability of human rights. But basically, you know, the single reason why you being a human being, you know, you have there are those rights that are ideally yours, you know, like the right to life. That is a right that, you know, that cannot be granted by anybody or any being. Thereon we're going to talk about, you know, when, like, you know, these rights can be when these rights can be curtailed and how they can be curtailed and why they should be curtailed. And then we're going to talk about the context of that in regards to the internet. In 1948, that is when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was formed, simply known as the UDHR. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was formed with a single reason, being that you know, that all human rights are born free and equal in dignity. Nowadays, when people talk about international human rights treaties, or when you talk about international conventions on human rights, or even local laws, that is where most of the human rights bases are formed, are usually from UDHL, and the body that does that is the Office of the High Commissioner. That's the body that it's now in charge of that is the body that oversees that, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. And when you say that human rights are universal and they're inalienable, we talk about we need to talk about equal entitlement and enjoyment of human rights. That the right to, for instance, the right to free speech is not over the right of maybe the freedom and the freedom of you know, assembly. That these rights are equally that these rights are equal, and their enjoyment and the enjoyment, like the enjoyment is and the enjoyment should not, you know, one single right should not be above the other. Although, although when we talk about the fundamental human rights, you know, like the right to live, that may be a different case. So let's talk about state commitments and obligations and protections. When we talk about nowadays, we have seen very what is the obligation of the state to you as a citizen, and what is the obligation to you as a citizen? So that's what the next subsection is on. Obligations, commitments, and protections. And in here we see that ideally the state is obligated, the states must refrain from interfering with or curtailing the enjoyment of human rights. Nowadays, we don't see this happening a lot. I'm sure some of you and most of you have, have been on the long side of the law for this, not really on the long side of the law, but we have been in a situation whereby the state is supposed to respect our human rights, but we have found ourselves in situations whereby, it is the one that is it's the one that is actually curtailing, or it's the one that is restricting these human rights without any basic or any good reason. And also we see that the state is supposed to protect individuals and groups against these human rights abuses, and also states are supposed to protect and must take positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of human rights. So let me just pose this question right here as we continue to the next slide, and ask, for instance, when you talk about internet access, do you think the state, whose obligation is it when you talk about internet access, or when you talk about the internet? Is it the obligation of the state to provide access to the internet, if you were to be asked?
It's the state's obligation to ensure that there is no interference with the right to access information of its citizens, as opposed to the state having the obligation to make internet access available. Well, that's my personal opinion.
Sorry, just repeat that. It's the obligation of the state to ensure
access of information through various media by its citizens, and no limitations on the right to access information, as opposed to making internet access a universal right, although that is a goal which some states wish to attain.
Anybody else with a different opinion?
Yeah, just to add on, I personally think that it's a mixed obligation. On the one hand, there are positive obligations, seeing as the state is best placed to do things such as laying infrastructure because of the cost involved, and because people pay taxes for them to do such things. And on the other hand, there is a negative obligation to refrain from sort of interfering with other entities, private entities, for example, who are facilitating people's access. And even in relation to those private entities, there's a positive obligation to ensure that in doing so, it's balanced, and they're caring about things like inclusion and marginalized areas, etc.
Just hold that right thought. Hold that thought, and let me show you this image. And I want to hear what people think. I found this image and I found it interesting. I found it on the net and I found it very interesting. I want to hear your reactions on this. Abdul, I can see you already. You're already muted, so you can go ahead.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think it has been something that a lot of people have been thinking. In fact, some have even gone as far as to say that the internet is a human right. And certainly the internet can facilitate the realization of a lot of rights. And in that sense, it is it's crucial. But I wouldn't go as far as saying that it is like the basis of everything and even surpasses this basic needs like air, shelter, water, food, etc. But yeah, it is something crucial that I think states have an important role to play in both helping people realize that and refraining from limiting people's access to it.
Interesting.
This is Beryl.
Yes, Beryl.
I agree to some extent with Abdul. Yeah, but I also think that we have a very practical way of looking at the internet right now because of the COVID pandemic, and to see the role that the internet is playing because it has come to permeate almost every aspect of our lives when you look at the socio-economic aspects of our life. And even as far as political, civil and political rights are concerned. So to me, I wouldn't say that it is it's at the bottom of the pyramid, but I would probably put it somewhere maybe just above the physiological needs, because there are people who are still living and thriving without the internet, but they are welfare, or maybe they're and they're a little bit more disadvantaged compared to those who have full access to the internet.
Okay. Those are all interesting. Thank you for your for those views. When most organizations, and when you talk about internet, there's been the question that is internet really a human right? And in there we see that when you talk about human rights, recently the reason why we are able to talk about freedom of expression online, free speech, is because recently the UN passed, the human and declared that the human rights framework applies equally online as it does offline. That is why when we talk about free speech, we can talk about things like freedom of expression. We can talk about privacy. Ideally, these are rights that are before the internet, that these are rights that were meant to be exercised and enjoyed offline, but now with with technology and also with the internet, we find that this is what laid the foundation for why we say, or why we would say that internet access is a human right. Because when you look at, for instance, the right to health, the right to education, and when we look at, right now, when we talk about, every child should have, the right to go to school, to education and to access those basic services. We find that after food, shelter, and water, which are the basic human rights, then there's information. And with that information, right now, for instance, during the pandemic, we have found that most of the people, or even like, for instance, why we have this webinar virtually right now is because of the internet, for instance. And most of the schools have resorted to using virtual classes. And the reason why they are able to do that is, one, the foundation that, internet access, obviously, that, internet access they have access to the internet. And compare that with other institutions, or compare that with people who do not have access to the internet. And you find that basically, after the argument has been that, after these basic human rights, after food, shelter, and water, access to information, or rather access to the internet is a human right, or your internet access is a human right. In the developed world, or in the developed countries, especially in the West, they have gone ahead to say that, for instance, recently, was it the German Minister of Information, or I can't remember who, but it's a certain a government official from Germany who went and declared that, or who was arguing that not just now internet access, but basically fast internet access should be or is a human right. So let us look at the African Declaration of Human Rights. So in 2013, is it 2013 or was it in 2012 when the IGF, the annual IGF forum was in Nairobi? Several organizations and several individuals came together and formed what is known today as the African Declaration of Internet, African Declaration of Internet Rights and Freedoms. Some of you are familiar with that declaration, and maybe some of you aren't. But I will not go specifically to each and every principle, because ideally there are 13 laid down principles there. You know, there is a principle on openness, right to information, freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. You can access. I think it's online. It's online, so I think you can go ahead and when you look for, I think, is it africaninternetrights.org or something similar to that. And more specifically, I want to specifically talk about freedom of expression or the right to information, because I believe that is what is mostly of interest to me and to most of you. We say, when we talk about freedom of expression and access to information, in the declaration, and I quote, it says that everyone has the right to hold opinions without interference. And then it goes ahead to list, content blocking, filtering, and removal of other technical or legal limits on access to content, which constitutes serious restrictions on the freedom of expression and can only be justified if they strictly comply with international human rights law. Let me share with you this picture. Most of you have probably read this article, but I picked just a small subsection of that article. And it's very specific, it's Kenyan based. So I would like to hear your opinions on this. For those who are not able to read, I can maybe read it for you, the key sections, whereby during COVID, the health CS issued a warning stating that that the rumors issued a warning saying that the rumors mostly which were online, that the rumors must stop. But he went ahead to say that he knows that the empty threats, that he knows that, but because I know empty appeals will not work, we will proceed and arrest a number of them to prove our point. So if you read on the second paragraph, talks about following these threats, the government went ahead and arrested 4 individuals, 2 of them bloggers under Section 323 of the Act for publishing false information, and then there's a penalty. So my question is, do you think the health ministry was justified in arresting these people, and why? Would you say they were justified, in issuing these threats? And would you call this a threat, or would you say that in them exercising all, of course, the article says that the government has abused, but that article was written based on that is an opinion. So I want to hear your opinion specifically on this issue, because when you talk about freedom of expression online, it is something that has been, most people refer to it as that it might be something controversial, of which I want to hear all. I want to invoke your thoughts on this. Anybody can go ahead and and start. You can access the full article. I've also attached the full article down below. Or let me give an example, something that we all know. You remember just before COVID, somebody, I think somebody who works at the airport, took a screenshot or took a picture of a plane that was arriving with with Chinese individuals from China at the time. And then he posted it online. Later on, he went ahead to get arrested. He went ahead to, threats of losing his job. Let's look at that at that example as we are comparing it to this context.
Hi, this is Beryl. I remember I was one of those people who tweeted that he should be freed because at that time he was talking about, or rather creating an awareness of a potential danger or threat that the government wasn't taking seriously. And so to me, I don't think the government was right to arrest him. That was freedom of expression. Some people may look at it as maybe he was being discriminatory against the people coming from China, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was around protecting, or rather putting in the right measures to protect people from the spread of COVID-19. And as things have developed later on, in connection to that, you see that there are people who arrived in the US on a plane from the UK that had people who had COVID, and they did not do any quarantining. And that has had major implications on how COVID has spread, given that that plane arrived in Atlanta, one of the busiest airports in the world. So to me, I don't think that arresting this guy was right.
Was anybody else? You don't agree with you don't agree with the government on that specific scenario?
Yeah, but I also don't agree. Generally in that scenario, and also in the arrests of all the subsequent people. And I think, I mean, while the government has a duty to sort of maintain public order, especially during a crisis like this one, I think human rights can easily be thrown out the window. So in every action they take, it has to be a bit measured, and it has to ensure that the action it's taking doesn't have a negative effect that's a bit excessive. And in this specific instance, I think collaboration and sort of coordination with the press to make sure that there's more accurate information out there than disinformation, then that would have been a more appropriate sort of tactic to sort of addressing this as opposed to arresting people. Especially when you look at the wording of Section 23, the offense requires that one either sends that message that's false, knowing it's false, and calculate, and with a sort of calculation that it will cause panic, or it results in panic. That's hard to prove, and arresting someone for doing that and setting that precedent, sort of notifying the rest of the country, if you do this, this will also happen to you, has a chilling effect on the freedom of expression. And in a situation where you require people to collaborate and share information, it's not necessarily the best thing to scare them. But if they do share, and if the government perceives it as false, or rather contrary to our narrative, then we'll arrest you. So I don't think it's something right that people should be doing in situations like I've also shared, an article I wrote in the chat on Section 23 in particular.
Okay. Anybody else? I think these are, I'd like to hear the divergent or different views. If
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me clearly? I don't know if my network is okay.
Yes, I think it's okay now. You can proceed.
My name is Caroline, and I think this concept brings about the idea of the state having the influence on what the citizens should or should not see. When I look at it from a larger angle, what could have done really? When Abdul Malik said perhaps liaising with the press, you know, the internet is with us, the individuals. So basically we can share whatever we want to share, ideally. So I'm of the feeling that this is a double-edged sword. And when you look at the case of China, where the government tries to restrict what people should or should not see, I feel like with the multi-stakeholder approach in the hierarchical chain that is there, the people who are above the government are the ones who would be in a position to control them. But us as the individuals and the citizens, perhaps may be a bit crippled when the government does this to us in terms of the freedom of expression. So it's quite a very controversial topic as to whether they should or should not do this. And I think I'm on a neutral end this afternoon. I don't know where to stand and with whom to stand. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay. She's talked about a more neutral opinion.
Bernard, sorry, maybe just to chime in, I think there's a particular instance which I think would be useful to control, and that would be people in positions of authority who are sort of creating alarmist messaging. And I think, I don't know if everyone recalls when that MP JK Kiarie, when he had done that thread talking about the infection rate being way higher than we thought and everything. I mean, that's clearly something that's quite, he wants to raise a lot of alarm and cause a bit of panic in people. So in situations like that, which are exceptional, it would make sense. But even then, I don't think arrests would be something that should be pursued, especially when the government has something at its disposal, which is requesting the social media site in question to take down those posts and giving accurate information to such sites. And that site will subsequently publish it in the transparency report that the government did request this, and they complied based on the information they were given. So there's a less restrictive means which the government can always pursue as opposed to arrest.
Okay, he recommends that the government that there are alternative ways to resolve this rather than straight arrest. Anybody else? We can hear just one more or two, and then.
Hello.
Yes.
I think I have a different perspective.
Yes.
Just looking at the whole situation with the arrest of Elijah Kitonyo. An arrest itself isn't really a big issue, because if someone is going to publish information on the internet stating or making any claims regarding how the government is addressing a certain situation, them being taken or arrested by the government, it's only a step for the government to establish the truth or facts surrounding that case. An arrest alone is just an act of apprehending a person so that they can be questioned or just inquire further, and then it's up to the authorities to decide whether they're going to charge the person or they're going to set them free. And so if I'm going to publish information online, I should be able to stand behind that information and justify it. And so if I'm called upon to give more information on where I got that story or my sources, then I should not be worried. Yeah, it's also about like maintaining some sort of order, because when something like COVID hits, you expect that there are people who try to spread false information and create panic and things like that. And so I don't think the government was wrong that just arresting him. Maybe any step that would have been taken after that, so it would have amounted to like censorship or infringing of the freedom of expression. And it would have been an even bigger issue if this person just woke up one day and found that his Twitter account was deleted for no reason. He would have then said that his freedom of expression was being limited because he wasn't given like audience to air his views and things like that. And I can also just compare it to actions of another blogger, Cyprian Nyakundi. I think many people know him. He uses the platform in a manner that abuses the authority and sort of hurl insults at them. And when he's arrested and charged, he tries to maneuver that through the constitutional courts. So trying to use the constitutional court to maneuver or escape liability in the criminal courts. So if a step, just a simple arrest where you are questioned, you are asked where you get information, and then you're released after that without being charged. I don't think that's really fatal. It's just government doing its work. So it will only be bad where the manner of arrest is arbitrary, or they beat him up in the process. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that question, I think it's really, I think everybody, if we ask everyone, and everyone is going to, have an opinion on this, arrests, and if it's also in the manner of, well, when we talk about intimidation, for instance, how in the manner that these people are arrested, you find that nowadays we see that if for instance you are accused of any of these cyber crimes, or you're accused of publishing false content online, just look at the manner in which these people are arrested. A few days or a few weeks ago, there was one of the bloggers, I think it's Motemi Wakiyama, who came to be arrested at night. And if you remember, that was the only way that he could, he didn't even know who was arresting him, because, guys just came at night. They're not even dressed as cops. They just picked him up, broke down his door and just arrested him. And then look at how he was presented to court. I remember we were talking we were following a little bit on that case, and I was watching a bit of that case online. That he was presented in court. He was supposed to be presented in at Milimani. But just at the right, because that's where his lawyers were. But in the last moment, he's presented to Kibera, just to make sure that he does not have the right to legal representation. So that's what those are some of the questions that we ideally keep that when we talk about the intimidation, that he is being intimidated in that way, not because of, but mostly because of the content that he's publishing online, and of course later on he was later released. Right now we've talked about freedom of expression and right to information, or access to information, and we have seen what is happening in Tanzania right now. They have the elections. Is it today? Today's on Wednesday, 28th. Yes, they have the internet right now, and we have seen situations of whereby they have restricted some of the social media platforms. I think Twitter was down for some time yesterday, and also WhatsApp was down some time yesterday. And remember that when you're looking at the African Declaration of Human Rights, and when we talk about freedom of expression or access to information, we did not just talk about internet access as a right, but I don't know that, but you can probably mute yourself. Yes, I was talking about, that nowadays we are at a situation whereby I was giving the example of the Tanzania situation. We are looking at whereby they have restricted some of the social media platforms, knowing today is elections day, and right now we are seeing these situations happening all over the continent, and even other different parts of the world, whereby access to the internet is being restricted in such a way that you can imagine if we were to do this call on probably on a bandwidth of about 10 kilobytes per second, I mean, we would still have access to the internet, but really, would we even be able to achieve the objectives that we have set out to do? So I think it's a difficult question, not really difficult question, but I think really it's a question of the internet, the access question, or it's really a perception whereby the state, and if you look at the state and the civil society, this is one of the areas where you always see that conflict, because we will argue that, you know, freedom of expression is a basic human right, and then they will argue that, like some of you have said, that, you know, doing that or exercising that right is going to cause panic, and that really, I don't think that is a justifiable reason to curtail or to limit those freedoms. And if you allow me, just finishing up in the next few minutes, and just to talk about something that we've seen recently, and specifically on the data protection in the context of digital IDs and big data. We as an organization, the KHLC as an organization, was one of the organizations, along with Nubian Rights and well, I can't remember the other petitioner, who went to court to argue on the case of Huduma Number. And one of the things that we, if you look at the court, if most of you have looked at that court petition, that you will ideally look at that most of our arguments was based on the data protection principles. When we talk about, you know, things like purpose limitation, like why are you collecting that data? For what purpose? Why? And also the principles on data minimization. And when we talk about why do you honestly need, you know, residential global positioning coordinates, for what purpose, and how does that assist in identity? Identity matters. And, you know, how long is this going to be stored? And who is really going to be accountable to that, or at the moment, seeing that right now is when we are, right now is when the president assigned the office of the, I don't know if it's official, but the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So these are really questions that we look at, because right now, when you look at how the internet is, a major driving factor of that, of communication right now is data. Look at, for instance, what is happening in the context of elections. What has happened before? What has happened before in Kenya? I'm sure most of you know the story of Cambridge Analytica and how that came into practice, and how the influence that had on elections. And look at, if you look at, I tried to go deep into that some time back, and I was trying to look deeper into that and looking at how really do you influence an election through that way, or through the internet. And if you look at, the methodology, and these are things that we are seeing every day. These are things that we are seeing happening every day. These are things that, most of us do not consent into. When you talk about data in that context, or this one now is more on data rights in that context. But yeah, I think on this issue, data protection remains to be a fundamental right, especially in the context of the internet. Yesterday, I think it's one of the presenters said that we are seeing every day that unlike before, that right now the state is trying to, whenever there's a new, the introduction of a new law or a new technology, there's also something else, there's a policy or a guideline on that to protect individuals' data, to protect people's data. And they went ahead to give an example of the names and the data protection guidelines and the regulations. Yes, I think that's what I had prepared for today. Maybe I can take any questions if there are, and yeah, Do you have any questions? Or
I have a question.
yes, go ahead.
Since everyone has, to a certain limit, have accepted or reached a consensus that the internet is a form of human right,
Yes.
I pose this question to you as a human rights specialist.
Yeah.
Human rights are said to be inalienable and required for us to live a dignified life. And
Yes.
my mind goes to the indigenous communities who actually do not have any access to the internet, who
Yeah.
still manage to live a holistic and wholesome life without participation or access or use of internet and its connected services. So is it right to call it a human right, yet we have existed so long without it? And I understand that it has the potential to improve societies and to build up capacity and to improve life in general, but is it really an inalienable right if people are existing without it and living dignified and fulfilled lives?
Okay. Oh, that's a really good question. And a few years ago, I think that argument would have been that argument, I think, would have been valid, and it's still valid up to right now. But when I look at the current global context or the current trends in technology, access to the internet is, when we talk about internet access, it gives you, it's the formation or the foundation of most of enjoyment of other rights. So for instance, I gave the example of the right to education right now and how that is affecting people. When we talk about every child should have the right to, should have the right to education. And then we go ahead and look at right now the global context whereby people or children are not able to go to school. But you see but they're not really able to go physically to school. But they can do that. But technology enables us to do that, or rather the internet enables us to do that. And that's really where the question comes in. That is it internet access. That's where most of our argument is, that internet access ideally should be a human right, because when you just look at one of the key principles that I was talking about is on internet access and affordability. Most of the drivers right now, most of the people are working online, for instance, through e-commerce and other initiatives. So for instance, if their content is limited, or that right is limited in a way that enables them to lose their source of livelihood, ideally that is going to fundamentally deny them access to other basic rights. So that's one of the reasons that we argue, or that's one of the reasons why we say that internet access ideally should be a human right. And because as we have seen before, let me just go back to that slide. As we have seen before, they should be here. Yes. Remember when we talked about I don't think I'm sharing my screen. Earlier on, we talked about the human rights framework applying equally online as it does offline, which ideally which laid the foundation of internet access as we see it today. So we see internet access as an enablement to the enjoyment. It helps us enjoy other rights, and ideally, that's why we argue, or that's why my opinion is that internet access ideally should be a human right.
Bernard, may I just also chime in and say, just giving a very practical example and application.
Yes.
today, many government services are online.
Yeah.
For example, if you need to register to join a public university, you have to go to COOPS. You're not going to go physically to an office somewhere. When you have to register, like so many of these government services, if you're doing a search for maybe a car, whatever, a logbook, you have to go online. Talk about things like this other very specific one that has to do like with education. Also, you have to go online. So if you're finding that government services, let alone services that are provided by private sector, government services you're now required to do them online, submit your taxes online. If you don't have access to the internet, and by access, we don't just mean being able to have a device and switch on, but also being able to know how to use that, then you are at a disadvantage and you're not able to enjoy your rights. So for me, in that case, the internet is not just an enabler, it's something that is very much akin to a right.
Thank you, Beryl. Bernard, can I also try to contribute?
Yes.
So this is Kivuva from KICTANet. So
yes,
my name is leading KICTANet.
Sure.
So I think what is not clearly understood is what is a human right. Because a human right should mean something that should not be denied to you. It does not mean something that should be given to you for free. So for example, access to the internet being a tool for communication, you should not be denied using all your resources or whatever you can to access the internet. So for example, when we say food and housing is a basic human right, it does not mean this is provided to us for free. It means you have the right to strive to access them, and that right should not be curtailed. So when we say internet is a basic human right, we are saying access to that internet to you should not be curtailed. For example, the government cannot come and tell you, now you cannot access the internet. But it does not necessarily mean that the service or the internet will be given to you for free. So that's my contribution.
Can I say something on that, just a follow-up? Hello?
Sure, you can go ahead. This is...
Achille.
Yeah, yes, Achille, go ahead.
There are two ways to look at it. The first is a negative obligation, which my colleague has just described. The non-interference. Do not interfere with someone who is enjoying a right. It's the obligation to respect and to protect human rights. But then there's also the second angle, which is the positive obligation. That obligation might require the duty bearer to provide, to fulfill, or to promote enjoyment of the human rights. That one requires active, positive steps towards the realization of the rights. So there are two angles. It can be both. There's a negative angle, don't interfere, do not restrict access. Then there's also the promote, fulfill, provide angle. Example is right to water, for example. Or right to housing. Do not evict. That's respect or protect. Then provide affordable housing. Promote, provide, fulfill. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to add that there's a section of the school of thought that when you talk about internet access also argues the point on self-interests, and that on self-interest, specifically, let me see something from the chat, and specifically on self-interests, a few people of the school of thought come from the school of thought that when we talk about internet access as a human right, that government and corporates, that it is also in their best interest to ensure that access to, that internet access is enabled in all forms. Because look at what you have said, for instance, when everyone has access, when we are talking about everyone where we have access, Beryl has talked about access to public services. That ideally means that that ideally means that access to public services or access to so-called government services are not you're going to reach the number of people that the government is ideally trying to do. Access opens up. And also look at, for instance, telecoms. It's also in their best interest to ensure that internet access, that internet access is enabled for all. Because what does that mean? Of course, that ideally means more profit. If you have a free, open internet, that ideally means that you're going to expand the customer base. You're going to expand the user base, and at the end of the day, that could result to profit. So it's also in the best interest for the government and also for the different stakeholders to ensure that that internet access is a human right, and that access to the internet is enabled and open for all. Yes. Do we have any more questions or comments?
Yes. Hi,
yes.
Bernard.
Hi.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I have a question maybe on the internet access being kind of like a human right. So
yes.
like, what is KHRC doing to ensure that this right is met? Like, what are you guys doing? Yeah, and also maybe from your opinion on the study case we were doing on the government maybe arresting students and internet users, who are giving false information. Like, in your opinion, what do you think? Is the government justified to do that? I don't know, maybe. Yeah, what do you think?
Or if I think that the government is justified to arrest, I got two questions. One, what is KHRC doing? And two, if the government is justified to make those arrests.
Oh, yes,
that's
my question. Second question. Yeah.
Okay, allow me to start with the second one.
Okay.
I don't think the government is justified in arresting that, in those arrests, mainly because I talked about one, the manner in which these arrests are done. If you look at if you look at other developed democracies, the manner in which a suspect is treated, there's always the argument that you're innocent until proven guilty. But in this context, it's like you're guilty until proven innocent. And look at the manner in which these people are arrested. The manner in which they are arrested is really to send a message, and it really to intimidate on other users or other internet, on other users of the internet, trying to send a message to them, telling them that you should not, just trying to send threats and trying to send a message, and just acting tough. So for instance, I look at that quote from that I read from what the CS said. He specifically said that, let me just, he said, and I quote, "But because I know empty appeals will not work, we will proceed and arrest a number of them to prove our point." Look at that, for instance. Yes, ideally, you're trying to make sure that whatever content is on social media is not trying to cause panic and that. But the manner in which this is done it really suggests that the manner in which this is done suggests that it's not really about trying to control or trying to limit those freedoms and those rights, but it's also trying to intimidate other users from accessing the internet. And two, what is KHRC doing about this? So KHLC, as a human rights organization, one, we're an advocate for an open internet, and we advocate for an open internet and access to all, basically. That is why I think initially when the declaration, that declaration was formed, KHLC was one of the participants of that declaration through joining coalitions, because right now we have seen every day that it's as an organization or a civil society organization, we really need to form coalitions or be engaged in bodies, like-minded individuals like KICTANet, who are hosting this internet governance forum. And the reason of that, and the reason of being in coalitions and being in such multi-stakeholder groups, it's that it enables you to have different opinions and different views. That way, that at the end of the day, pushing for that agenda, pushing for that decision at a local, at a regional, and at a global level is going to, enable basic and it's going to enable access, or it's going to enable that. It's going to make sure that these rights are respected, and these rights are respected in a meaningful manner. And two, they are. Sometimes that does not really work out, sometimes that never works out, and you have to take, a different strategy. So one of the strategies that we have taken in the past and we continue to take today is through court decisions or the court process. We have gone to court on a number of issues. Like, for instance, I was talking about the Huduma number case that right now it's still at the appeal process at the Court of Appeal. And that is really one of the strategies that KHLC uses as an organization, and trying to lobby for support and just to trying to lobby for support at these forums and global levels, and engaging in meaningful discussions with service providers, with state agencies. And also, if that doesn't work out, the court process. I hope I've answered.
May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I've just seen that Liz has posted something in the chat that pertains to if the government was ever to formally declare the internet as a human right, what are the responsibilities that the government would have towards the realization of that right? I pose a question back towards you now from a pragmatic perspective. As developing nations, we already do not fulfill most of the human rights that are envisioned, and the limitation of our resources inhibits our ability to fully protect and realize those rights. So would the official declaration and recognition of the internet as a human right prove to be a tax burden on us as citizens for the realization of the rights of others, in the sense that it increases our tax burden, and we're already in a crippling cycle of debt at the moment. So the need for the infrastructure and all those other connected services, digital literacy, what is the opinion of KHRC in the achievement of that realization of internet as a human right vis-a-vis the issues that I've raised?
Let me just say, you've said that a huge reason or a huge part of why you think that the declaration of internet access as a human right is the tax burden, right? That's the basic of what you're saying. That's the fundamental argument of that's your fundamental argument, right?
I wouldn't say fundamental, but a significant contributing factor, alongside the fact that we already, as it is, have human rights which are not being fulfilled to their maximization, like the right to adequate and reasonable housing, which is enshrined in our constitution, yet we have an issue of people lacking the basic ability to provide for themselves shelter and food. So how do we compare those against now the internet access rights, and then moving forward? That's what I want to understand KHRC's view of how that can be attained while achieving the other human rights and not causing a tax burden and putting us in a tighter fiscal situation.
One, I don't think that the realization or the declaration of internet access as a human right, of course, it would have an impact on the tax implication, or on the budget. It would have a budget implication to that. But look at what we have seen previously. But like for instance, you've talked about the right to housing, and this brings us back to the issue that we've talked about, the obligations and commitments of the state. Because ideally, right now, if you look at the rate of internet penetration in the last 20 years, and you look at, I was reading this article saying that the rate of internet penetration in Kenya right now is at it's at 87%. I don't know how accurate is that, but it's one of the highest in Africa. And now look at what other providers or what other actors in the space are doing. Yesterday, my representative from Safaricom went ahead and said that they are trying to ensure that they roll out 5G as soon as possible. And so really, the question of internet access being a human right, I don't see how I don't see any challenge, or I don't foresee any any strong challenge to that, based on those reasons, because as we've talked about, as we have discussed, we've specifically laid out issues talking about how access will enable, not just the government or not just the private sector, but how internet access will be a key enabler to other sectors of the economy. Because, for instance, when you talked about the tax burden issue, we are not seeing the question of, if access to the internet is a basic right, then we're going to enable more people to have, to have access to the internet, more access to the internet. That brings out a new skill. That brings out new skills. That brings out access to new markets. It brings new skills to, especially to people who do not have that access, and they can make money or they can make livelihoods, from creating content online, from doing businesses online. That would significantly grow. That would significantly grow the economy, rather than cause a financial burden. And that's what I think.
Excuse me, hi.
Yes.
So I would like to
just,
I'd like to give a comment on what was just said. And I think that we need to look at the internet as a public utility and a resource, as opposed to it being something luxurious. Like, we need to see the internet as a public utility that, if we, let's say, for example, you've talked about internet and education, and the fact that according to UNICEF, 432 million children this year were not able to access maybe online learning because they do not have access to internet infrastructure. And so you need to look at it in terms of, if you needed a road, if you needed a school, that's the same way you need to look at internet access, as a public utility that the government has, like Ochil said, a positive responsibility to provide. And so that's one thing. Number two is, I don't think that the responsibility on the government to ensure that every area of Kenya has actually internet access, because if you look at maybe the distribution of internet access, it's concentrated on market areas, mainly because private entities, let's say, for example, Safaricom, would concentrate on commercially viable areas, and give stronger internet connection in those areas, as opposed to places or regions where the market would not necessarily, people would not necessarily pay for that. It doesn't mean that they don't need it. It just means that for maybe private entities, it is not commercially viable to have internet access in those regions. And so there's a responsibility on the government. And already the Communication Authority has been taking up that responsibility to provide internet access in underserved and unserved areas using the Universal Service Access Fund. The problem is probably the extent to which, you know, we need to still find money, but it doesn't mean that giving internet access, internet infrastructure a priority is something that would cost us more ideally. Because if you look at maybe the Ministry of ICT, the development strategy and the development strategy of Kenya as a nation is through the maybe broadband infrastructure or digital economy blueprint, for example. And I think ICT policy, all these things have Kenya's development agenda, which is aligned to everyone having internet infrastructure and ICT and accessible ICT for every other bunch of things that the government wants to do, including maybe digital identity, which is something they want to do. And so all these things rely on everyone within the country having the same access to that public resource. So it will cost us the same as wanting to say every region of Kenya should have the same roads or should have something else. So it's a public utility and public infrastructure. Thanks.
Thank you. I love that definition that what you said. I love that example. That if you're going to build a school in a place that is concentrated, or if you're going to build a school in order to give people access to the right of education, one thing that you, for instance, if it's a new area, what you would do is, you know, maybe build better roads. And so the question is, so if we look at the viability of that, are we going to say that we will not give these people access to that because it's going to, in the end, the infrastructure or laying down the infrastructure, which is, for instance, transport, is going to cost us? I don't think that's the way to go. But you have raised very good and fundamental questions, and I think the next speaker is somebody from Communications Authority, and maybe they will help expound on the role of government responsibility in terms of providing internet access. And you know, I will also try to listen in and hear about, because if you look, because the government has a responsibility in terms of enabling, you know, in terms of the framework, in terms of the legal frameworks, and in just creating an enabling environment for telecom providers and other service providers to ensure that, you know, to ensure that that basic infrastructure is laid out, and also, you know, ensuring internet access and penetration as an avenue to the enjoyment of other rights. So I think, yeah, I think that sums it up very nicely. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Bernard. And thank you so much, participants or students, for that, that deep engagement in internet and human rights. I've learned a lot. I'm also sure you've also learned from each other and from Bernard. Now, our next speaker is Mwendwa Kivuva. Mwendwa coordinates KICTANet's project on community network. We actually have we actually coordinate a number of community network projects in a number of African countries, including Tanzania, some in Kenya, and some in Uganda. So Kivuva, you have the floor. Over to you.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you for the previous speaker, to Bernard, because what he was speaking about on internet access as a fundamental human right, and also the feedback we have got from members, from participants, feed into what I'm trying to present on enabling internet access to the masses, enabling internet access for the underserved regions. So I'm sure I'm sharing my screen. You're able to see it. Huh? From the screen, you are seeing this image. This image was taken from a community network called Tunapanda, which is based in Kibera. And you can see there is apart from the electricity pole, there is a mast on top of a building with an aerial pointing somewhere. So I am sure you have seen such masts in buildings all over Nairobi and even in other towns. And this is actually people taking internet access in their own hands, saying that us providing internet to our people is our responsibility for many reasons, probably because ISPs have refused to come to your area. Government action or inaction, which is government policy ensuring that there is no internet everywhere, because policy is government action or inaction. So if there is no internet in your area, that is actually a government policy not to provide internet to you. So today we are talking about community networks. What are they? So we say that community networks are democratic, bottom-up, build internet networks by the community themselves. So a good example is what is the cost? So if I might ask the participants, what is the cost of internet in your area? Anybody?
This is Caroline. I pay 2,900 per month for 5 Mbps Safari.
How much? How much?
2,900 per month for 5 Mbps Safari.
So that is Safaricom. Eh?
Yes.
Oh, good. And are you always using that internet in the 24 hours a day? Is that
considering working from home, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, but on that 5 Mbps that you have been given, 5 Mbps probably means in layman's terms, is like a pipe of water giving you maybe 5,000 liters of water per minute.
Yeah. Okay.
So if I might convert the word meaning of 5 Mbps, is like 5,000 liters of water flowing from the tap per minute. So of that, what is the percentage you think you are using any one time?
Can I really tell? No.
Oh, okay, but can you share the internet in your homestead so that it's not only you using? Maybe
there's a limited number of devices, of course.
Okay, but they all can use the internet. Eh?
Not everyone around, just per se, like everyone within the apartments. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so the idea of community networks is the simplest example is someone getting a 10 Mbps link from, let's say, Safaricom, and that 10 Mbps from Safaricom costs 4,000 shillings per month, 10 Mbps. And then if you are, for example, in a community with 10 households, you pull a cable from that Safaricom router to each of the 10 households. And all of them get an example, because it's 10 Mbps, we can say each one of them will get 1 Mbps, which is very good broadband, because broadband is anything more than 254 kbps of internet speed. So you can imagine if we pull this internet to 10 houses, and each house pays 10% of 4,000, that's 400 per month. So each household will pay 400 bob per month, and then you consolidate, and then you pay Safaricom, they are 4,000. But everybody will get pretty good internet, which is broadband. So that is the simplest form of the explanation of a community network. Of course,
a question. Yes, I think I like the analogy you are giving in terms of sharing the data, accessing, and also the sharing the cost.
Yes.
What would you say or give a comment on the security aspect within that traffic?
Okay, that's a good question. And I think what will happen is you will now need to be able to build capacity within the technical, if it's not a bigger community network, you will have to build capacity within the technical people who are developing the network, growing the network, and giving the network out to neighbors within the community, to the users in the community. So that means you will have to include a router on the middle of it, a firewall. But they are very cheap actually, like a MikroTik firewall will be able to do bandwidth partitioning, meaning allocating 1 Mbps to each household so that one household does not use more than their fair share of the resource. And also, you can put the security restrictions so that whatever you are sending out, the other guys cannot be able to see, and all that. So there will need to be some technical knowledge on how to implement at a larger scale. But now the example I was trying to put to the participants was so that we can be able to appreciate what communities can be able to do when they come together. So,
thank you.
So another analogy, of course, is how our communities have always been able to come together to build churches, to build mosques, to lay out even water. You find many communities, they have one common water project owned by the community. People fundraise for buying the big tanks and the piping and all that. And then every month, depending on the amount of water you pay to your local water company or the local water company within your vicinity. So that was just the analogy. And because I've expounded the entire bigger picture, so probably I will now go to now explain on the other issues that community networks face. So that communities face, for example, there is this thing called last mile access. So you find that like the government has tried to provide the the national fiber optic cable. It has pulled this fiber optic cable. Of course, there is a termination from Mombasa, and then there is a big node in Nairobi. And then this cable they have dug and laid a cable across all counties in Kenya. All counties have access, have that cable. But is that cable terminated to offices, for example, county offices within the county? Do they have access to that cable? Actually, if you talk to the implementer of that project, which is what's the name of this authority, where Dr. Kate Gitau is the CEO. If you talk to them, they have not terminated that cable to all counties, but the cable is there. So that schools, hospitals, universities, within those regions, although the cable is there, they still cannot access this facility. And that is why even now, if government itself cannot even access internet that it's trying to provide, and ISPs are not able to go to marginalized areas to provide internet because of their financial and there's somebody speaking. I would like to probably try to mute him. Let me see who it is.
Hi. How are you?
Let me mute her. Okay. So let's continue with where we were. So let me share the screen again. The screen is shared. So we are saying, why do we need community networks from all that big explanation? Because communities don't have access to the public internet. We know how Kenya is, for example, the marginalized areas. And we say that also these communities, they start by having a small network coming to them, maybe through satellite, fiber, and then they now start expanding from that node, and they make sure that all their communities are covered. So this picture is an example of a community network in Congo called PamojaNet. And it's, you can see there's some ladies there trying to build masts. So they are carrying these metal so that they can be able to mount them and put the radios, the internet radios. And these guys, this community network within Congo, they have even been able to build their own GSM network, which is not licensed, but you can even make calls on GSM, not on things like WhatsApp or VoIP. On GSM, using even Mulikamuizi, you can make calls. So there is this access problem we are always talking about. How to get the unconnected connected to broadband. In rural homes, there is really no connection. Sometimes even 2G, even if you want, for example, to even send a WhatsApp text, before you get that one tick, it might even take 10 minutes as you look for the internet. And this lack of access causes inequality. For example, what Beryl was talking about before that, if you want to do filing of taxes, when you want to apply for a driving license, when you have to apply for a passport, you don't have internet, you don't have internet in your community, you have now to get into a car, travel maybe to another bigger city or town to be able to access those services. That is an inequality in itself that is being and a disservice that's being done to the community. Okay, so on the established community networks, they usually have challenges because, for example, of sustainability. So if, for example, as a community, you decide that we have come together, we have bought this internet of 4,000 per month. So a bigger community, of course, you do it at scale. So maybe it will be 100,000 per month. How do you sustain that? So some members pull out, some refuse to pay to maintain the network. So there's that challenge of sustainability. Sometimes you are trying to mount your radios to point internet to maybe different towns within your community. The local government comes and clamps you down. They tell you they want to get some taxes from you. They say you have to pay to buy some licenses to do that. So you get harassed by government. So those are some funny challenges that they get. And there's also, of course, funding challenges. If you are now growing and you need to buy the routers, you want to buy the masts and the equipments to run their network, of course, you will run into funding challenges within your community. And of course, there's the competence. Like the question I've been asked, how do you ensure the security within the community network? So you will find that within the community, there will always be a skill gap in how to manage this network and how to secure it, how to grow it, how to make it faster, to optimize it. And not only that, there is also other challenges like local content. Now you have brought the internet within your community. Let's say it's a farming community, or a fishing community somewhere in Lamu, or a farming community somewhere in Narok. When you have given them the internet, what content are they accessing? How informed are they on what they can do with this internet? For example, if you are a farming community, are you able to get good farming practices from the internet you are using? Do you have local content that is localized to the challenges and the information you want to access on the internet? And of course, there is also challenges of language barrier. You find that the content they want to access or the technical devices being configured are in the language of the people and are in a language where these people in this community are not able to understand. I think I've talked about licensing and taxation, and there's a bigger problem, of course, of electricity and energy, because you can imagine in some regions, you find that there is no internet, there is no electricity. So you pull the fiber cable, for example. How will you prepare powering the devices within the community? Even the communities themselves, you give them Wi-Fi. How are they able to put their laptops on, their computers and all that? In Kenya, we are claiming that we have been able to work on this power challenge because through the free laptops, the government says that there is electricity in every primary school in Kenya, so meaning that in every region there is electricity. But if you go to villages, you find people have no electricity in their homes. So some community networks like Bosco, Uganda, which is Bosco, a battery operated system for community outreach, the meaning of the longer term for Bosco, they have been able to do power at scale, solar panels at scale, powering the entire community network. There is no part of that community network within that section in Gulu, Uganda. There is no section within that community network that uses the national grid. All of it is using power from their own power panels that they have been able to put up. So some of the solutions that have been suggested for having successful community networks is having the community have the ownership, from the fundraising, putting more people into the network and developing the network. You let the community have full ownership. And also the community is supposed to create the value that they can understand. Why do we really need this internet? Why do I need somebody to come and, if I'm a landlord, why do I need somebody to come and put a mast within my building to serve my community? They should actually pay to you to put that mast in my building. But and it's a community mast. So show them the value that they are creating. For example, there is that example that has been given in the previous session about online exams or people learning. And there is that example of burial of government services. People to see the value of this internet. And for funding things, of course, there is things like approaching people like Communication Authority of Kenya to give to use the Universal Service Fund, for example. Talk to your local MP to put some of the funds in the CDF, Constituency Development Fund, into the community networks that are being built maybe within the region if they are marginalized. Other solution, of course, is to build capacity, technical skills, especially for people trying to grow that community network with that region. And there are also so many other solutions that can be given, like ensuring that you use cheaper devices within the community, building partnerships, especially with like the big telecoms. You can approach, for example, Safaricom, tell them our community is so marginalized. Are you able to give us a bigger pipe at a discounted rate so that people can come to the internet? And then when they start using the internet and they know how to use, they will see the value. Probably they will increase usage and it will translate to profit to you as an ISP in future. There is also documentation of lessons learned within the community, so that, for example, if you are expanding the community and there are challenges you had faced before, you know how to address them as you continue to go forward. So you can see like this, for this image shows that Bosco Uganda community network I was talking about. It's actually serving villages. So this is a Wi-Fi router, ubiquity Wi-Fi, and the guys within this community are able to access Wi-Fi on their phones. And there's a community center for charging your phones, which has solar. And these communities are actually not charged because these guys are able to get funding from some international NGOs. So they only charge businesses like radio stations, small government offices within the region to access the internet. But the community, if they're using Wi-Fi and all that, is free. They are not actually charged to use it. So one of the questions we're asking is, probably we should need to have more community involvement in investing in bottom-up models of infrastructure and connectivity, so that guys within the community are able to know that there is this models of access. We don't have to just wait for the big ISPs to bring Wi-Fi to everybody. You can actually take this bull by the horns and develop internet within our communities on our own. And we are also saying probably we need more meaningful research on outcomes of access of internet within populations. And so some of the questions that are even seen being shared here is, why do ISPs and governments put broadband infrastructure in some areas and not others? And I think even this thesis has tried to talk about that. And also there is the issue of content, which I've touched on building local content that is helpful, not just content about probably entertainment and all that, but content that is valuable in developing your community. For example, good content will be like Akili Kids, that program for kids learning, like toddlers are learning how to read, how to write. Content about farming, content about probably healthcare, maternal health, and things like that. So the big question is, what do we want people to do with bandwidth within our community, so that we can have that value proposition? So some community networks within the region is a community network that KICTANet is starting in Kilifi and Bungoma, Kilifi County and Bungoma. There is a Tunapanda network in Kibera. So these are community driven. There is Lanet Umoja Nakuru, where Chief Karaoke came from. It's still under ideation. There is a Heri Kisumu, which is running, actually it's working. And there is actually many which cannot be considered community. They are sort of commercial, but youths within the region, within different parts of the country have come up and put masts, and they are able to provide internet, affordable internet. You go to Juja, you go to Syokimau, you go to Kikuyu, you will find these things running within our communities. So that's where my presentation ends. And now probably we can have class interaction. So any questions, feedback, insights on the presentation?
Thank you very much.
Okay, go on.
Thank you very much, Kivova, for the wonderful presentation. This is a topic that I'm also very interested in. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can also have a look at some of the questions that have been raised via the chat, which are quite important, yeah. And I think they'll also answer some of the questions I've had. But thank you very much.
Anybody else as I look at these questions?
Yeah, I was saying this is a very good presentation. I've never come across such a presentation in my life. So I just want to appreciate these community networks.
Yes.
So there's a question around it's maybe it is its legality and all that. Maybe you'll answer. But what I wanted to know is this is affordability and also something to do with bringing the internet closer to communities that are far from the infrastructure.
Yes.
And it's a critical access point from a last mile point of view. So my question is, have you considered the model of having circles so that the issue of affordability can also be addressed? Because this is a very wonderful idea in my view.
Okay, so actually it is actually a circle for it. It's actually like a circle because you as a community, whatever you bring, how you model your community network, it's you to decide. You can say now it's a membership-based organization. Every household gives 500 shillings per month. And then there is a secretariat that ensures that there is availability of internet and expanding it. So it is you as a community, if you are a good community mobilizer, you decide what model you want to use within your community. It can even be ad hoc, how you just start with 5 people and then it grows. Or it can even be one guy coming up and saying, I will do all the funding and maybe I will recoup within time. But the challenge with that is that they will, after a while, probably they will get greedy and increase the fees. And now it becomes like a fully fledged ISP. The idea now is if Safaricom is making a profit of 100 billion in a year, for what will have happened if there was a big community ISP competing with Safaricom? It means that our services, even the Safaricom, that a big ISP will still be able to pay taxes, licensing and everything, and pass all that benefit to the community. And they will not have profits running in the billions because it will just be a community-based service. You just pay staff, pay equipment, managing and all that, but you minimize the cost so that you pass the benefit to the people. Okay, so let me try to answer.
Thank you so much.
Good. Let me try to answer some of these questions. I start from probably the more bottom. Do you have more publication and community networks in Kenya? You as Kenya for further reading. Good. We have actually, we have publications and I can, if you go to the KICTANet website, KICTANet.org. Let me send to everyone. You will be able to see so much about community networks. You will even see a policy brief on publications. Let me get that link on publications. So KICTANet has so much policy briefs they have written. So on publications, if you go to policy brief, you will see a policy brief on community networks. Also, on the website, on the blog section, let me just send you some blogs, a link to all the community networks blogs that have been done within the website, so that you can know what community networks are there within Kenya and within the region, within Africa. Because KICTANet is, as Liz had said before, is coordinating the knowledge building of community networks within Africa. So within the entire continent, KICTANet is coordinating them, coming together, speaking to each other and knowledge sharing. So we have been compiling this information on all these community networks within the continent. Okay, let me see other questions.
Hi, Mwendwa.
Yes?
I have a question. It's from the chat.
Okay.
And I'll also ask a secondary question on behalf of one of my colleagues, Caroline Sogomo. So I'll begin with the first question. This was based on your Kibera perspective, the example that you gave.
Yes.
So my question is that from an ISP perspective, if the network provides bandwidth to a single user, and then that node is then distributed amongst a multitude of users without the ISP approval or like the community at least writing or acknowledging that they're going to use a distributed system, does that constitute an illegal connection in the eyes of the ISP?
So
And
it depends. It depends on the terms of service of that with that package. So some packages, if they give you 5 Mbps and you're always on torrent, you running a lot of data, they will throttle you, and you can actually tell them this service is being distributed within our communities. For example, there is a big, there is one small, big ISP called Power Internet, which is in part of the eastern part of Nairobi, not eastern, southern parts. Is it southern? The sides of Kawangware, Kibera, all the way to nearly Kikuyu. There is a ISP called Power Internet. And they also use the same method. They get a big bandwidth from Liquid Telecom. And then they have just put these two radios I've shown you, these two masts, and they pull cables and they have connected the entire region. And they give internet of 1,000 bob per household. So, but I've talked to Liquid Telecom, telling them this is our business model and this is what we're doing, and Liquid have agreed. So this is the issues you talk to ISP. If they agree, well and good. So Beryl is asking, where does one start to set up a community network? We have said you have to be a good community mobilizer or interests. You come up with people with common interests. So for example, how do you start a water project within your organization? Or how do you start building a church within your locality? Just there is leadership, they have employed a chairman, a treasurer, a secretary, and then you call community together, we have to build a church there. Somebody donates land. So even community network just like that. So there are so many other, there are so many ways how community network has come up. Some people have written to sponsors, they have given them capital to start. Some have just started by, I buy internet from my house, I distribute to my neighbors, other neighbors say they want, you tell them bring 1,000 per month, you buy bigger bandwidth from Safaricom, you distribute to them. And within no time, the network has really grown and you even have staff you are employing and all that. So it's ad hoc. There is no one right way of how to start a community network.
Thanks, Mwendwa. That's like the planning aspects of it or operations, but I was looking more on the technical aspects of it for especially non-technical people like me.
Okay, so there is you can join probably from network operator groups like there's a network operating group in Kenya called KNOG. There's some WhatsApp group even for community networks in Kenya. So if you guys want to, if people are interested, I can post the link here, and I will post on the WhatsApp group for CNs. For these alumni, I will post on that group the link if you want to join the community network WhatsApp group in Kenya. So there's all technical people there who you can ask all the questions, how to start, the technical, now they can second you people to help you with setting up your network. So I think probably that one answers. But even Internet Society has the global chapter has some very good resource on community networks. And so if you are community network, if you are struggling, they can even send people to you to help you in configuration, setting up the routers, firewalls, and all that for probably even free. Okay, another question that came from a follow-up on above kind of good question. Do the users also use common password to access the community network or routers? So so those are the rules you will set up within your network. So your techie will advise you what passwords to use, or if they will use a password, or it will be open. So those are just local logistics that you determine. My question is that from my speech, if the network provide bandwidth or that one have answer, what does termination mean in respect to fiber to the counties? Oh, so termination in fiber, sorry for using technical language, it means that fiber has been pulled and it's available, like a bus terminal has been built. But for this terminal, for this fiber to be useful, it has now to have a last mile, be pulled now from the endpoint to the users, the nodes, the edge. Which are the users? Your laptop, your phone, your home. It's like having a bus terminal and you don't have buses. So people will go to the bus terminal and wait for the buses up to the evening and then they go home. Buses do not come to carry them. So it's that same way with internet. So that's why I was saying like NOFB, the national fiber optic cable that government has put, it has terminated them on counties. It has provided the terminal, the bus terminal for this fiber for people to unload, but there are no now buses to come and get into that internet and take you to YouTube, take you to Facebook, take you to KICTANet, Google. That is the missing link. And these are not illegal connections. Somebody had said, because this Wi-Fi run on a frequency called 5 megas and below, which is free frequency. Even CA recognizes is free frequency for Wi-Fi. So that's why even in your home Wi-Fi, you don't pay a license to use it. So even if that home license, your Wi-Fi connection, you put it on your balcony and your neighbors can access it, that is free frequency running on low wavelength bandwidth, and it is not licensed frequency. It is open to use by everybody. I think I've used my fair share of time, and I will want to take this back to one Liz Orembo.
I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Kivuva. Makofi kwako. Now that we are via Zoom, I don't know how we are going to do it, but that was very insightful. I also learned a lot from your presentation. Now, we have Victor Capillo, still from KICTANet. Since we are not going to have the regulator coming to talk about how we engage in policy processes, Victor Capillo is going to come in the place of CA to talk to us about how we can get involved in ICT policy development processes or internet governance policies. Yeah, do we have Victor Capillo here? Let me just check. Oh, great. Now you can go ahead.
Okay. So I want to talk about the public policy formulation process in Kenya and what it entails. Give me 1 second. So one of the important things to determine when looking at public policy is just to understand what exactly is policy and what does it mean in the context of all this internet governance work that we're doing. So it's important to say that policies can be defined as specific or a decision-making framework or a course of action to achieve a specific effect or change. And of course, in the public sector, that will include, government policies that or directions that now put in place measures to respond to a specific issue or to specific things that are present. And policies can be broad, they can, they give direction, they can determine standards. For example, the 2/3 gender rule is sort of like a policy, which says that, you need to have not more than 2/3 of either gender in appointive positions. So you can see that that is a standard that is being set. It can also be a statement, for example, saying that human rights need to be respected as principle of governance, or that the rule of law shall be respected. If you look at Article 10 of the Constitution, you'll find these principles of governance, which are also policy questions.
He speaks.
Sorry? You're saying? You can't hear?
Oh, Victor. Sorry.
Yeah, hi, Victor.
Yeah.
Now, also because of the recording, just place your mic somewhere near your mouth so that we can hear. Also, yeah.
Okay. Is it clearer now?
Yes, just volume kidogo.
Okay, just confirm if you can hear. If you can't, just let me know. My voice is not.
We can hear. The thing is also for recording purposes. I don't know if Dan is okay with what he's getting.
Okay. So yeah. So what I've just said is that, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. That policies can be broad, they can give direction, they can, express standards, or, state certain concepts. So for example, I know you've probably discussed universal access funds. So that is the concept of using government funding or funds from licensees of telecommunications bodies to fund further internet access programs. So policies can help in terms of that. They can also express principles, like I've said in Article 10. So the Kenya policy making process is not very straightforward, because most of the time it doesn't usually comply to what is the expected standard. However, I'm going to take through the standard which is recommended in terms of what they are supposed to do. Ideally, you'll find that sometimes we have laws which are passed and there's no policy that backs the law. But the ideal position is that you need to first start with having a policy in place, and then the policy will determine whether there is actually need for law or legal amendments or the establishment of institutions and other administrative procedures. So most of the time, we find that we usually start with the law as opposed to the policy. However, the practice is changing, and you can see with the Data Protection Act, both law and policy were promulgated at the same time, which is a step in the right direction. However, the policy ought to have come first, and they need not to be developed concurrently. So in terms of the process in Kenya, one of the critical stages is the identification of the problem or the issue at hand. Most of the time, the issues can be identified by different bodies. So it can be either from civil society, it can be government, it can come from academia. And basically, this is the question that government is being asked to address. So for example, you can see right now, we are saying BBI is an issue. It is now become a document. It came from, the issue was poverty and discrimination, and the agenda was set. So you can see that it doesn't matter what sector the issue comes from. The important thing is that there is an issue which has been identified. For example, funding of counties in the current constitution, the 15%, and counties were feeling, or there were people feeling that the amount that is allocated is low. So the issue then was that we need to look into the question of funding for counties. And you can see that's how that issue has been translated into the BBI agenda to show that maybe that amount could be increased to, let's say, 40%. So the next stage, once you've identified the issue or the problem that you want to be addressed, the next stage is usually setting the agenda, which is basically the process through which these issues and the proposed solutions are brought to the attention of government and seeking the government's attention to create a solution for the problem. So for example, if you take one issue, say that there was no data protection framework. So the country has data protection framework. I had Bernard talking about the Huduma number. And, you know, if you look at how they framed the issue before the court, that, you know, there is no law to protect privacy, yet the government is collecting, you know, personal information. So with the problem identified as, you know, no data protection framework, then you set the agenda in the issue to the government to say, you know, they use the court as an agenda setting platform, because at the court they were able to argue these issues and say that, you know, because in the absence of data protection law, the rights to privacy will be compromised, and therefore government needs to put in place a framework. So the court held that the government needs to put in place a legal and policy framework. So you can see how even the court is helping set the agenda, and which then takes us to the next stage, which is basically the policy design. So the policy design is basically the process of developing an effective course of action to reach the desired policy goal, or, you know, the specific project or programs or activities. So it will involve a bit of analysis, planning, allocation of resources, and, you know, just critical thinking about the problem and determining ways in which the problem can be addressed or the issue can be resolved, you know, and what the government can do about it. So, for example, just going back to the Huduma number / data protection, is that you have now a situation where the court has said, you know, develop a data protection framework. And you can see as a result of that, the government had to swing into action when the case was filed to put up a task force that collected views of the public and developed these draft documents which people were able to contribute towards establishing the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. And you can see Parliament approved both law and policy. And finally, the law and policy were promulgated. So you can see that once the policy document has been put in place, the next stage is the approval process. And you can see that, for example, the Data Protection Task Force submitted their final documents to the executive, which is basically the Ministry of ICT, which had started the process. The ministry reviewed the policy draft policy documents to ensure that they were in line with constitutional standards. The same was also reviewed by the AG's office to ensure that the legal provisions complied with the drafting standards as required by Kenya Law Reform Commission. And then they were submitted to Cabinet for approval. And once they were approved by Cabinet, the documents were tabled in Parliament for approval to the relevant committee. And you can see that at Parliament, I'm going to talk about that process shortly, but you can see that the Parliament has a role in policy formulation, which is basically approval of Cabinet documents that have been approved by Cabinet. And once they have approved it and it has been passed by the House, the Speaker will take it to the executive, back to the executive for the process of assent by the President. Or if the power is delegated to the minister, then the minister shall publicize, which is another stage, which is to publish in the Kenya Gazette, the specific policy document, because the policy will only come into force once it has been published in the Kenya Gazette. assuming there is no specific effect, date of taking effect, which in policy is usually the date of publication. So if you look at the data protection policy, you will find that it has a date, probably a date and a month, which is the date on which it came into force. Once the policy has been adopted and formally published, publication is a legal process. When we say ignorance of the law is not defense, the phrase came about this aspect of publication, that once the government publishes policy or good documents, then it's incumbent upon members of the public to review and interact with these documents so that they are aware of what proposals and what measures the government is planning to implement. So once the policy is done, then you find that the policy will perhaps have made recommendations for either establishment of institutions or amendment of laws, or establishment of further standards, creation of procedures. These recommendations will come from the policy. And with that, that is how the policy making process feeds into the lawmaking process. In the ideal situation. So once the policy had made recommendations, so for example, the data protection policy recommends the establishment of a legal framework for regulation of the right to privacy in Kenya under Article 31 of the Constitution. So then what will happen is that the task force, for example, in this case, drafted a bill, and that bill is then submitted to Parliament for publication. And once again, you can see that the bill is published by Parliament. The National Assembly, in this case, published the bill in the Kenya Gazette, which is basically intended to notify members of the public that, hey, a new law is coming. Why don't your views are requested? So you'll find that this public participation process is open, and the National Assembly will publish a notice also in newspapers of nationwide circulation, requesting for views of members of the public in terms of to contribute or have their say in this proposed law. Once it's published and people are given an opportunity to make submissions or add or send memorandum, the bill is taken through the process of first reading. And this is where it is read in Parliament, in the National Assembly. Let me say the National Assembly as was in the data protection. We know that we have both Senate and National Assembly. The process is the same. So when I use the terms interchangeably, just note that whenever it's the process in Parliament or National Assembly and Senate is the same. So just take note of that. So the first reading is to help bring the new law to the attention of members of the House. And at this stage, you find that the bill or the proposed bill may be referred to a specific committee. So looking at the data protection was referred to the ICT committee because it touched on ICT issues. Other bills, if it involves security, it can be referred to the security committee. For example, the computer misuse and cybercrime law was referred to the ICT committee because it involved computer issues, but also the security committee was involved. So depending on the issue, the relevant House committee will take charge of the bill from that process. And then the next process is second reading. And before the second reading, you find that the committee is required to go and have separate sittings where they consider the various proposals in the bill. At this stage, they also consider the input by members of the public, the memoranda that have been submitted, and then they prepare reports. So at the second reading, the committee will come back to the House with the report. The report perhaps you find that we'll have recommendations on specific aspects of the proposed bill. And this recommendation could include maybe addition of additional clauses or deletion of some clauses. And these are contained in the report. So the House will, at the committee stage, which is the next process, will then consider this new bill. Sometimes it already the amendments will be made, and this is when the House is sitting as a whole
the interruption.
committee.
Hello, Vic.
Yes, you're saying?
Okay, I'm saying that a few people are complaining that they can't get you clearly. If maybe you can just raise your voice a little bit, we will appreciate. If you can check on the chat, Amrit and also Eggline is also complaining.
Can someone unmute and say whether they can hear? Liz?
We can.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Victor, we can hear you.
Okay, so do I proceed?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was saying that at the committee of the whole House, you'll have the whole House reviewing the bill clause by clause. So here members can make contributions and they can propose amendments where specific, questions have arisen as to proposals that are contained in the bill. And finally, will be the report stage where the committee will take, having taken the findings of the members, we will incorporate those ones, and it goes for the third reading. So at the third reading, there could be further amendments, which should be minimal. Ideally, none should be proposed at this stage, but sometimes you find that they're critical issues. And once it is approved by the House of the third reading, it proceeds to the President, who may assent to the bill as it is. At the same time, the President may have additional recommendations and may refer the bill back to the House for further consideration. When the President refers the bill back to the House may consider the President's input and make those amendments to the bill, or they may reject them, but that would require 2/3 majority of the House to reject the President's views. Likewise, if Parliament has adopted legislation and the President fails to assent to it within 14 days, then the bill will also automatically become law. The bills will also be published in the Kenya Gazette with the effective date. Sometimes previously the practice was that the specific law needed to have a date of coming into effect. However, these days, because of the amendment under the 2010 Constitution, what we have is that the bills will automatically come into force or come into effect on the date of publication. So once it is published in the Kenya Gazette, the bill is now active. So with those few remarks, that is generally the process of policy making. Can invite questions from the floor. Any questions? There's one gone to lunch.
I have a question.
Yes. What's your name?
Amrit.
Amrit.
With regards to cybersecurity, or rather just any ICT policies, has the president ever referred back a bill to the House with his own recommendations from your experience? And have the House adopted or rejected those recommendations?
Okay. Any other question? I can take that one. Currently, we've only had, two key ICT-related laws in the past 3 years. One was the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act 2018, and the other is the Data Protection Act 2019. None of these received further input from the president. They were debated at the House and adopted and signed into law assented into law by the president without any further amendments. So far, none has been referred back with recommendations.
Hello.
Yes.
You've mentioned the two ICT.
Tell me
this is Beryl. This is Beryl.
Sorry?
This is Beryl.
Beryl, yes.
Yeah. I was saying that you've mentioned the two ICT related laws, but I also remember one is not necessarily strictly speaking an ICT law, but it's the information law, KICA. If you remember in 2013, there were proposals that had been made, and they were sent to the president, and he referred back with some amendments. Civil society felt that
sorry, we can't hear you.
After a lot of campaigning,
hello, Beryl. You're sort of can't hear you. Perhaps you could type in the chat if the audio is not audible at this point. Any other question? Anyway, thanks, Beryl. I think what you're referring to was the Kenya Information Communication Act Amendment Bill, which had generated a lot of controversy some years. Yeah, and there were different proposals. And yeah, not all the amendments proceeded as had been intended, and some of them were rejected. So yeah, valid point there. Any question from the floor? Well, if there is none, then I can hand over back to Liz.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor. Makofi kwako. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on policy matters. Liz told me to take over because she was joining another meeting.
Okay.
So this is Kelvin Kariuki. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're going on well with your online learning. Remember, we are ending today, so please contribute to today's lesson forum discussion and also do the assignments. What I need to consult you on is what time do you think we should make the final quiz available? You can also type in the chat, at what time do you think we should open up the quiz? I can see Ambrit is suggesting between 6 and 7.
Hi, Chakaris.
Yes.
Can you just put a time on the quiz? Because I don't think there will be any time where we can have every one of us available at the same time. Okay. So can we just have a time on the quiz such that when someone starts, that's it?
Yeah, that is okay.
And then maybe end it by some day, maybe give it a deadline.
Okay. I think that is what we'll do. What I was asking is, at what time then do we make it available? I think 6 will be okay.
Yes, for me, yes.
Yeah, okay. So 6 p.m. Then maybe the deadline can be tomorrow, maybe tomorrow morning at 8. Is that okay?
Can we do Friday, please?
Friday. Why do you want Friday?
Because I do remote working and most of my work is at night. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, because what we wanted is that tomorrow during the day, we at least process your marks and therefore be able to announce some of you who will have passed at the KIGF tomorrow afternoon. So that was our intention.
Oh, okay.
So we would appreciate if you complete the quiz maybe tomorrow before 8 in the morning.
Tutajaribu.
Sawa, jaribuni. Any other comments?
Nizungumze hapo.
Tafadhali.
Mimi naamini baadhi ya Watanzania wenzangu hawapo. Kuna hiyo imepigwa jam kidogo.
Yes.
Na wafikiriaji hao kwa sababu hata nimejaribu kuwapigia kwa njia kawaida naona response. Na ninajua wao hawakuwa aware mwanzoni kwamba wanatakiwa watumie kitu kama hicho ambacho ninachokitumia sasa hivi. Na mimi mwenyewe nilikuwa hivyo lakini ninajaribu sasa hivi kukacha kwa sababu kwanza juzi internet ilikuwa haiko vizuri.
Poleni sana. Kile ambacho tutafanya, tutaongezea muda wa kusoma kisha mfanye mtihani labda Ijumaa ama Jumamosi.
Sawa.
Haya. Lakini sasa that will be on individual basis. So si kila mtu, ni wale tu wachache ambao tunaelewa zile challenges ambazo wanakumbana nazo kwa sasa.
Sawa.
Asante.
Basi nitakusaidia kuwajuza.
Tafadhali nitashukuru. Na pia waambie wanifikie either kwa WhatsApp ama kwa email.
Sawa.
Thank you. Okay, so kama hatuna jambo lingine la kuzungumza, I think tumemaliza industry talk ya leo. Sasa tuendelee kusoma na kumalizia zile assignments. Kisha by 6 kama uko tayari unaweza anza kufanya hiyo cut. Asanteni sana kwa kuparticipate. I hope mmelearn a lot na muendeleze vitu zingine ambazo mmejua leo. One of the things I would recommend is that I think on the Internet Society page we have a training on how to build community networks. So if you're interested in that topic like I am, please go to the Internet Society and search they have a course on how to build community networks. So asanteni sana and enjoy
Karim.
the rest of your afternoon. Yes.
Yeah, just a quick one, eh?
Yes, Abdirahim.
Yes, we appreciate that the quiz will be available from 6, huh?
Yes.
So now, considering some of us we have joined the entire session for today morning for the online, what do you call, for the Zoom meeting, yeah?
Yes.
And we need to revise a bit for today's classes and also finish the assignment. So I don't know, can the assignment be posted from 7? If that's not too much to ask.
Tumesema tunaifungua tu hiyo 6,
Uh-huh.
but it will be available mpaka kesho asubuhi saa 2.
Okay.
So you can do it anytime between that. It is timed, so
Okay.
itakwambia maybe for 1 hour, so you can access it anytime.
Thank you so much.
Before you go, yes.
I have another question. So there was a concern that the website jams when everyone is there.
Yes.
I'm wondering whether that has been sorted in case we start the exam at 6.
Yes, yes. I think our technical team sorted that out. I hope it won't happen again.
All right, thank you.
Asante. Okay, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. All the best in the remaining part. And all the best in your final quiz. Please, tomorrow, remember to participate in KIGF. I hope you've already registered from morning, mpaka jioni. And remember to tweet your questions. We'll make sure that some of your questions are addressed by the panelists. So tweet your questions using the hashtag, let me just type it here, hashtag KEIGF, IGF 2020. So please remember to tweet with that. As you tweet with this, you can also appreciate KICTANet for giving you this chance to participate in the Kenya School of Internet Governance and learn about internet governance. You can also put insights, some of the things that you've learned from the course content and also from the industry speakers. So tweet, tweet, tweet. Our intention is to make sure that this hashtag trends tomorrow. So please help us. We really rely on you. Help us to make this hashtag trend by 8 a.m. tomorrow. So make a tweet and you can follow me. I'll always follow back at Teacher Karis. You can also follow KICTANet at KICTANet, Kenya ICT Action Network at KICTANet. Yeah, I think so. Please also follow KICTANet and follow me if you can. Asanteni sana. Nice afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.